Chapter 6, Where You Lay Your Head. You will be sent to 4 months before the cataclysm. It's important, Scootaloo, that you get a lay of the land in advance of the destruction of Equestria, so that we may both in the present compile all of the things that you have observed, so as to determine what was the cause of the horror. But why bind me to Miss Shirley? The last pony asked. She stepped back and watched as her purple dragon companion moved several large bits of equipment with his iron-wrought limbs, making an open space across the floor of his cavernous lab. She's sweet and all, but wouldn't she be the least likely pony in Equestria's past to have an answer to what happened? Why not just bind me to Princess Celestia so I can talk to her directly and get the whole thing over with? That would be an extremely solid solution. Spike nodded, his violet neck pendant dangling. If it was possible. He brushed the rocky floor clean with a green-crested tail before producing a crystal vial of ashes from a nearby cabinet. Using nimble fingers, he started drawing an alchemic circle across the floor with the powdery dust. Alas, though contacting Princess Celestia would certainly give us the best possible perspective on the eve of the cataclysm, I cannot send you back in time bound directly to her soul. Why not? Scootaloo made a face as she watched the mystical designs take form under the dragon's careful motions. I thought you said that ponies you could bind me to were friends of yours. Didn't you brush tails with the princess on multiple occasions as she mentored Twilight Sparkle back in Canterlot? To think of the princess and I as friends is most humbling, he smiled, and undeniably true. But no matter how attuned I may have been with the royal alicorns of Canterlot, I would be a fool to think that I could in any way target the essence of a goddess's soul. Even if I was the most powerful dragon that had ever lived, I would never be capable of binding any time-traveling creature to the life force of Celestia or Luna. Once a mortal, always immortal. 300 years of experience is but a pin drop, you see. If you say so, Scootaloo mumbled. She gulped and glanced briefly about the colorful instruments and chemicals that sparkled across the lab, feeling suddenly like she was stumbling before the plank of a very intimidating launch pad aimed into a sea of green fire. But still, Miss Shirley, how do I expect a lone schoolteacher to help us out after I tell her that the whole world is going to die? You don't. Scootaloo's scarlet eyes bugged. I don't? Scootaloo, you are going back to be an observer. It is you who must find out about the future, not them. You're joking! Her face contorted as she back-trotted in disbelief. Spike, if you and I are gonna be serious about unearthing the mystery of the cataclysm, we're gonna need all the help we can get. And I can't do diddly squat if I pretend like nothing is going to happen to all the ponies who I meet in the past. The fact that you know what is going to happen is certainly sufficient enough for you to accomplish your tasks, child, Spike said, finishing the circle and sprinkling the remaining dust back into his crystal vial. But where your knowledge is an asset to you, I'm afraid it will only be a deterrent to them. If you arrive back in time as a harbinger of doom, you will not scrounge up information. You will only arouse panic. But maybe that's the key. Scootaloo's eyes glistened as she leaned up towards him. Spike, if we tell everyone what happens, maybe we could... Stop something that will transpire anyways, as in accordance with the immutable flow of time? He stared deeply at her, his eyes hanging like cold emeralds. She deflated, scruffing at the rocky floor with a wayward hoof. But something has to be done, Spike. This just doesn't feel right. There's so much pretense about what you're sending me to do. You know, I've done a lot of harsh things in the wastelands to survive. I've lied to many soulless creatures, and I've cheated several mercenaries who I knew would only swindle me in the future. But in the living land of Equestria, all I will find are ponies, and to me any pony is a friend. I don't think I can lie to friends like I've attempted to manipulate everything else within hoof of these wastes. I'm sending you back in the past, Scootaloo, because I know that you are resourceful, intelligent, and brave. But more than any of those attributes, there is one quality you must master in order to succeed in your newest endeavor. And what is that, pray tell? Subtlety. She frowned at him. I don't do subtle. What a surprise. He half chuckled, nostrils fuming playfully. Well, I suggest you stretch yourself in that area, old friend. because where you are about to go, subtlety is richer than oxygen. Once you've landed, I suggest you take many long, even breaths before you so much as talk to a single pony. Just how long am I going to be there? She asked with a brief bout of nervousness. I've stored up enough green flame in my enchanted fire glands to send you back for a period of 5 to 7 days. Spike counted his claws for emphasis. Remember, because you'll be bound to Shirley, it is important that you do not leave more than 40 meters from her position, or else your soul will no longer be anchored to its source in the past. What happens either way? Scootaloo blinked. If the 5 days run out or I walk out of bounds of the teacher? She gulped. Do I die in a puff of smoke? If you call speedily returning to this lab in the presence of my wholesome company deadly, then certainly. The elder dragon chuckled. Fear not, Scootaloo. As you are not truly your physical self in the past, you will be oblivious to pain, hunger, and even exhaustion. Your manifested soul self will be akin to a projection of your essence. The only ones who will think that you are real are those in the past who observe you. So try and make a good first impression. But what if they recognize me? She suddenly winced. I seriously doubt you'll have any worry about that, Spike stated matter-of-factly. You'll hardly resemble your past self. For that matter, you hardly resemble any pony at all. Ahem. His face glinted at her in a sudden sheen of melancholy. And in speaking of your past self, the mayor stared at him forlornly. He said, though we both know that bumping into your foolish copy will hardly have an effect on the immutable passage of time, I would still advise against it. Meeting a doppelganger from the past is existentially exhausting, to say the least. I'll take your word for it, she said in a dry voice. I really have no intention of doing that anyway. She murmured, turned, and trotted firmly into the circle. Now send my butt back already. Very well. He nodded his green-crested hand, bounded around her, and perched on a mound of gemstones flanking the alchemic circles. Remember, Scootaloo, subtlety. He gestured as his shadow stood over her. Subtlety is the key to success. Yeah, I get the picture. And patience, Scootaloo. If you expect to be there as long as my flames will permit, then you will make no progress by rushing things. Once you've arrived back in time, try not to make any harsh decisions. Be calm, be serene, be friendly, or just be silent if you wish. Most of all, watch, listen, observe, and once you've made contact with Shirley or any other of our acquaintances, be discreet with them, be courteous, and after you have won their trust, then and only then you may attempt to proceed higher among the equestrian strata, and hopefully even contact Princess Celestia herself. You will do well expecting this to be a gradual, systematic, and even relaxing process. Who knows? Perhaps you may even enjoy yourself. He finished with a smile. Enjoy myself? Scootaloo let loose a girlish laugh. She stood boldly in the center of the circles, and she balked at him. Now I know you're fooling with me, Spike. Hardly, child. I do so sincerely wish for our experiment here to succeed, for the sake of Equestria's future. But more importantly, I hope that you will learn from this something that will bring you both peace and contentment. Spike, I'll worry about closure when I'm dead. He nodded. I was afraid of that. He pointed. Close your eyes, Scootaloo. She squinted at him in brief perplexity, but ultimately obeyed. With a shuddering breath, she allowed the world to turn dark around her. Her coat's hair stood on end as she felt the sterile cold air around her, expecting all of it to start burning off her body in a simple flash of a green torch. Just as she began settling her trembling limbs, she sensed a dim aura spilling through her eyelids. A high-pitched vibration filled the sudden static air. Her heart started racing, and she clenched her teeth tight, preparing to plummet at any moment. Instead, she was struck with a far more alien sensation, a wave of frosted powder billowing over her figure. Scootaloo couldn't help it. Her scarlet eyes flew open, and she gasped to see a layer of dust blanketing her mane, forehead, and hooves. A coarse gray filament matched the material that formed the now green glowing alchemic circles beneath her. Jaw quivering, she gazed up at Spike. Whose ashes are these? His body was a somber shadow with cold marble eyes. Shirley's, he said, closing the jar once more in his grasp. What? She stammered. I'm sorry, Scootaloo. It's the only way. He leaned forward, opened his mouth, and covered half of the room in a vaporous emerald light. Spike! She started, but suddenly saw his image slide away from her at 2,000,000 kilometers a second. She was screaming backwards down a quivering snakeskin of hundreds of refracting lenses, eating away at her flesh and bone with acidic clouds of forest green chaos. The ivory band of Shirley's powdery ashes wafted off of her and coalesced around the Pegasus's echoing heartbeat like a porcelain cocoon. And at the bottom of the typhoon-esque collapse, the ashen egg broke away and deposited a grunting pony into a warm basin of color, smells, and light. Wait! Scootaloo shouted, but her voice wasn't hers. Her eyes flickered under the curtain of a gasp, then squinted, for a very foreign beacon of light was once more slicing its way up an alien sky, cradling her in its solar arms. Hissing, sputtering for breath, the mare wobbled up to her knees and stared into the sun, a thing she hadn't done in so many years that she briefly forgot what a danger it was. And yet, as long as she stared, her eyes weren't burning, as if they were made of queerly stronger stuff than granite. She needed focus, so Scootaloo finally ripped her gaze from the sun and looked around her. She saw the porcelain southern mountains, the crystal blue lake at the base of the hills, the billowing edges of the ever-free forest, and, coasting over the edge of a warm and sizzling eastern horizon, the first of many gold-thatched rooftops that prophesied the edge of downtown Ponyville. Oh, Spike, she murmured in a whimpering voice, once more a breath that sounded alien to her, but she hardly cared. You didn't send me back into the past. You sent me to heaven. She bit her lip, and tried to steady herself as emotions flooded back in a single overwhelming heap. Scootaloo felt her lungs quivering, her pants coming out in tiny, hyperventilating chirps. She tried to remember something that the purple dragon had taught her about taking steady breaths, about being serene, about blending in with her surroundings. But as her eyes watered and her limbs quivered, she couldn't take into account any of those things, instead searching, gazing, piercing the sky for one thing. The rainbow! Where is it? She looked once more above the crystalline reflective surface of the lake. The prismatic band was gone. There was a lot less fog and decidedly more heat than the last time Spike had sent her to this spot. It took a few dumbfounded moments for Scootaloo to realize why. This was afternoon, not morning. In 2.5 decades of equestrian grayscape, the mare had forgotten that there used to be a time cycle within the span of a day. And yet, her heart rejoiced at the revelation. It was like riding her scooter all over again. Her scooter. Her childhood. Equestria. Praise Celestia, it's all so magnificent. The voice inside of her half sobbed. She limped forward on stoned legs, nearly drooling. Now where's that dang schoolhouse? I'm liable to kiss Shirley when I see... She shrieked as she suddenly slid down a long incline of red wooden shingles. Uncontrollably, she smacked into the bell tower of the schoolhouse's roof, toppled over twice, and fell like an anvil off the side of the building where she had materialized back in time. She plunged into a wide drinking trough standing aside the playground, snout first. Scootaloo tossed herself out in a sputtering spray of water and plopped hard into the dirt, gasping for air. Fully soaked, she instinctively shook her coat into a flimsy facsimile of dryness and shuddered. What did Spike say about taking deep breaths? Oh yeah, duh. She tilted her snout up to glance across the playground, and in doing so, she peripherally noticed a wet mat of mane hair curling over the side of her neck. Blinking, she raised a hoof to push some of the threads into closer view. What she saw was a soaked cluster of black threads, with the faintest hint of amber. Her face scrunched as she glanced every which way, then ultimately turned to face the water trough. Trotting over and peering in, she watched as the liquid surface settled from her brief collapse into the basin. As the water smoothed, the reflection of a strange Pegasus came into being, a young filly with a rusted copper coat, like the color of earth and clay, from her hooves to her feathery wings, shining far brighter and richer than the dull brown coat of future Scootaloo, or even the orange sheen that she had had as a foal. Instead of violet or aged scarlet eyes, there reflected twin marbles of bright amber, as if sculpted out of the vein of a tree in spring. Finally, her mane flowed with an elegant sheen of black silken threads, with a thin streak of amber running down the middle that matched the color of her blinking eyes. "Why, hello there," she murmured with a drunken amusement into the bobbing reflection. "Who are you?" She finally took a moment to recognize the strange voice coming out of her. Just like everything else about her projection, the voice was different. Younger than her future self, but still laced with the same inflection and murmuring qualities of her experienced soul. She judged that, whoever she looked like, she appeared no older than 22 winters, which, for the time, placed her about the same age as Fluttershy, Twilight Sparkle, and many of the older ponies whom Scootaloo looked up to in her youthful days. It all seemed strangely, even fatefully appropriate. All fears about any pony recognizing her flew out an invisible window. If she could somehow come back to the future looking and sounding like this, she was certain even Spike himself would scratch his scaled head in confusion. The transplanted mare ran a hoof one more time through her obsidian threads, before a sudden movement in front of her grabbed her attention. Glancing up, she realized she was standing in front of a window to the schoolhouse. A veil of curtains hung over the pane, but there was a ruby shadow shuffling from within, followed by a muffled feminine voice and several young murmurs replying in cadence. 25 1/4 years into the past, school was in session. Scootaloo's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the warm landscape buzzing around her. She smelled the crisp spring air. She heard the singing of birds and the murmur of cicadas. Spike's Ponyvillian terrarium was a pathetic pin drop in the great throbbing basin of life now encompassing her, hugging her. She had every reason to stand right there and soak in that moment forever. She didn't. "Can anybody tell me what a harpy is?" Several hooves lifted in the classroom air, mixed with levels of enthusiasm. A mare sporting a joyful mane of fuchsia looked over her students and picked out the most eager of the bunch. "Yes, Snips, do you know?" "Oh, a harpy is like that cutie mark on the lady who owns the music store downtown." A chorus of giggles lit the room. The turquoise-coated unicorn in the center of the laughing circle sunk shamefully into his desk. The ruby-colored schoolteacher chuckled sweetly. "No, no, Snips. And for clarification, Miss Lyra's cutie mark is aptly named a lyre, not a harp." Shirley cleared her throat and smiled at all the students. "A harpy is a sentient creature that resembles a falcon. It has the body of a bird of prey, including sharp talons and broad wings. But its upper half consists of the head of a simian." She trotted over towards a picture stand and unveiled a poster of the aviarian monstrosity. Half of the class gasped, the other half murmured "oohs," and started forward with tilting interest. "Over 90% of their population is female. They feast mostly on the meat of rodents and smaller birds, and they live in nocturnal clusters among the bluffs of the eastern ocean shore." "Who?" A pink-coated pony with a tiara for a cutie mark made a retching face. "Like, who in their right mind would actually eat meat?" "Yeah, that's so gross." A silver filly mirrored her friend's nauseated voice from one desk over. "They might as well just chomp on each other." An understandable reaction," Shirley nodded. "Eating meat is very taboo in pony culture, but as a matter of fact, there are many sentient creatures in Equestria who eat meat on a regular basis, such as our allies, the griffins to the north. And they live out their lives in relative peace and tranquility." She motioned once more for the beastly picture prop before the class. "Even many harpies today live in a pacifistic peace. But that hasn't always been the case. Equestria used to be swarming with violent flocks of the creatures, ruthless pirates who ravaged the countrysides during the chaos wars that preceded the Second Age. And—" Shirley's gaze glanced up at the clopping sound of hooves, and her green eyes twitched. Something of a grimace graced her figure, but as she suppressed it at the last second, clearing her throat and smiling presently in the company of the little foals. "Ahem. Why, hello there. Is there, something I can help you with?" The faces of 3 dozen foals twisted confusedly. With the creaking of the wooden desk seats, they gradually turned around to see a curious sight at the back of her classroom. A young adult Pegasus stood, her long mane wet in tangled mess, her copper coat dripping a puddle of moisture over the floorboards. The open doors basked her in a platinum aura, like a golden visitor from beyond. No pony knew any wiser. Scootaloo gulped, dumbly gazing at the 40-odd young sets of eyes blinking up at her, the first time in years that any ponies had ever stared at her. Her heart was beating so hard she had a difficult time standing. To keep her legs from wobbling, she stepped a hoof forward, but jumped at the first moment she saw the foal's bright eyes moving along with her. Clenching her teeth, she leaned back into a row of bulk shells and gulped, exhaling in a wheeze. Hi. Hello. Hiya. Hi there. Hello, ma'am. Hello. Hi. Oh boy. Scootaloo shuddered, a sore lump forming in her throat. So many eyes. So many ashes. A wave of gray overcast washed over her vision until her last blink ended, and the schoolroom was staring at her once again, the many young faces scrunching in confusion. There was not a single frightened expression amongst them. The last pony suddenly felt like hugging every single one. Did you have a delivery of school supplies to make? Shirley's chirpy voice rocked Scootaloo back onto her hooves. The deposit box is out back. I happen to, be teaching a class at the moment. She cleared her voice and added with a wink, unless you want to take a seat and learn all about the carnivorous habits of harpies. The rows of seats giggled amusedly. No, I, Scootaloo murmured, trotting slowly around the circumference of the one-room class of many heads swiveled innocently to follow her. I mean, yes, I'm a delivery pony, or something like that, yes. Her voice deflated under a raspy air of nervous choking. She coughed, shook her wet mane a bit drier, and stumbled into a pole bearing the flag of the celestial crest. She winced, jitteringly set the rocking banner still, and stood back on 4 hooves. Just passing through, and, who sent you? Shirley spoke in a suddenly hushed voice that was meant for the 2 of them alone. She trotted over slightly. Do you have a working permit? Scootaloo turned and instinctively tilted her head up, until she realized that she had to lower her face to stare cheerily eye to eye. Geez, you're shorter than I remembered. The school teacher's green eyes blinked crookedly at that. Suddenly, a filly gasped girlishly from the front row and pointed an excited hoof. Ooh, look at her cutie mark. Oh, wow, that's so awesome. Cool. I've never seen one like that. Pretty. Shirley seized the moment, her face brightening as she stood aside the visitor's flank. Oh, yes, that's the most splendid cutie mark, isn't it? Huh? Scootaloo blinked at the teacher. She glanced back at her hindquarters and did a double take, her amber eyes exploding. Holy manure castles! Emblazoned across her copper coat was an elaborate masterpiece of a magical branding. A celestial ring of black and amber sunflares encircled an obsidian pair of loops, like a stretched-out figure 8. Judging from its sideways angle, it had to have been some natural version of the infinity symbol, complete with what could be best described as an abstract mimic of the celestial crest. Scootaloo performed a few dashing glances back and forth from her sudden mark to the flag in the corner of the schoolroom, just to be sure, and there was no doubt about it. Well, if that isn't the most awesome thing that ever awesomed. Class, remember our lessons on the cutie marks last month? Can anybody tell me what the crest on her flank means? A few hoes rose up. Shirley pointed towards the center of the room. Yes, Twist? It means that she's in the royal service of the Canterlot Court. The royal service of what now? Scootaloo made a sweating face. Absolutely, Twist. Shirley grinned, standing boldly next to the immeasurably confused visitor. All ponies born with the crest are lucky enough to become servants in Princess Celestia's court. It means they get to live out their lives as overseers and watch horses, spreading the sun goddess's influence far and wide and maintaining order across Equestria. We're very lucky to have this special guest with us here today. The teacher spun and grinned in Scootaloo's face with a sudden foolish giddiness as she hopped in place, whispering, Is this about the request for the field trip to the Pony Canterlot Gardens? Scootaloo's copper temples lost grip of the sizable sweat drop.
I just wanted to. Most esteemed servant of Her Royal Highness, Princess Celestia. Shirley proudly swept her erect snout towards the classroom, her voice like a sugar-coated megaphone. Why don't you grace the students with what exactly it is you do for the Keeper of the Sun? The copper mare's eyes bulged. She glanced nervously across rows upon rows of pastel-colored eyes staring felicitously at her. It was a veritable sea of infant lungs, holding a giant breath in anticipation of Scootaloo's next charming words. I deliver packages for the royal offices of, Flamestones. She winced, but brightened slightly as the class murmured in awe at her fabrication. What's a flamestone? A sprightly redhead with thick eyeglasses gasped. A flamestone? Scootaloo exhaled, speaking suddenly with natural ease. A flamestone is a type of gem that has been enchanted with elemental red flame as to result from severe compression brought on by the collapsing chunks of the moon that collided with the face of the equestrian wasteland immediately after the cataclysm. Her face twisted into an endless wince as she swiftly registered the words that had been spat out of her mouth. The class stared prolongedly at her, a mosaic of blank faces. A long-necked unicorn, his brown face scrunched, throated, Duh! What the cataclysm? It means a destructive event that forever changes the face of the earth. Excuse me, class. Shirley nervously spun around and looked worriedly in Scootaloo's face. Ma'am, is everything all right? No offense, but you don't look or sound too well. Are you feeling ill? Shirley's green eyes blinked. Ma'am? Scootaloo was staring at the children, face after face, snout after snout, horns and ears and manes, but no hair bows. Where's Apple Bloom? She murmured in a childish voice. The Apple family's daughter is homesick for the day. May I have a word with you in the atrium real quick? They're all going to die, Scootaloo slurred, her eyes quivering at all the happy, innocent faces. Every single one of them. She hissed through clenched teeth and tilted her wincing snout ceilingward in a maddening stupor. This building! I've seen it from the clouds. Not one stone is lying on top of another. Ma'am! Shirley gasped, nervously glancing from the class to the Pegasus and back. She leaned into her, nudging a little. Please, let's take this out of the other room. You're gonna scare the children. At the word scare, Scootaloo's eyes flashed open. Trailing on her lashes were scores of lantern-lit memories, of ink-leathery trolls thrashing at her through the darkness, of billowing storm fronts that threatened to tear her zeppelin apart, of lonely nights spent lying in a swaying hammock and reading about the immortal sorrows of the dead princess. A pained breath surfaced at the base of her lungs and came out in the form of a menacing snarl. She had seen the world consumed in fire, and she had ridden the tongues of the flames back to this shuddering moment in time. The Holocaust had to end somewhere. I'm sorry, Spike, but screw it. She spun and stared daggers into Shirley's eyes. You need to contact Princess Celestia now. Me? The ruby-coated teacher wilted backwards. She chuckled nervously. But I'm no royal servant of the Canterlot court. You're the one who's qualified to. Will you stuff it with this royal servant nonsense? Scootaloo barked, eliciting several foolish gasps from the classroom. She took a few vicious footsteps towards the teacher. The only business I'm here for is to send a message, and that message has to be sent to Princess Celestia. Nobody else, and I don't have much time. I can't be expected to leave this classroom now to deliver anything, Shirley briefly frowned. Even if I could contact the princess. This is not a joke. Scootaloo snarled, her voice echoing across the schoolroom as she leered above Shirley. Something horrible is going to happen. Something really bad. Ponies are going to die. Not just some ponies, but every pony. Please, you're making a scene. Dang right I am. Now let's stop beating around the bush and go see the princess. I'm not going to be here forever. Time is of the essence. And girl, you have no idea how true that statement is. Please, I don't know what you're... The end of Ponies! Scootaloo's amber's eyes flared as she breathed in desperate heaves. A burning wave of magic that will render all equine life to ash! You have no idea, no clue what kind of devastation I'm talking about. The sun and the moon, they'll be gone, vanished, leaving nothing but endless twilight. Scootaloo's voice stopped, her ears pricking for having heard something like a whimper. She gazed aside and twitched to see four-eyed redhead cowering behind her desk, her glasses fogged. To her sides and behind her, several more students were trembling, scrunched away from the sight of the rambling stranger. There were tears. Tears. No. It's not so bad. I mean, yes, it is bad. Scootaloo smiled crookedly, trying to straighten her frazzled black threads as she trotted towards the desk. The entire room shrugged away from her in one fluid jolt. She stopped in her tracks and gulped. Okay, so it's terrible. But most of you are still young, so, you should be enjoying all of this while it lasts. Every pony dies at some point. It's just the nature of... A few more confused sobs filled the air. Scootaloo snarled. Look, it's not like I brought the end of the world, okay? So don't be scared of me. They still trembled and shivered. She barked, I said don't be scared! The foals winced, covering their eyes to avoid her snarling gaze. She blinked at them, starting to hyperventilate as the impossible situation crumbled more and more. There was a whispering sound towards the rear of the room. She spun around to see that Shirley was no longer by her side. Instead, the jittery teacher was squatting beside the long-necked unicorn, murmuring into the colt's ear. Snails, go to the corner of 5th and McCracken and fetch Officer Silvertrot. Yes, Miss Shirley. The boy nervously jolted, bounded out of his seat, and galloped out of the school entrance. What are you doing? Scootaloo blinked wildly. Shirley motioned towards the door, trotting over to shut them. Why don't you just calm down and have a seat? No! Scootaloo rushed over, forcing Shirley to jump. Don't leave! Don't... She nudged Shirley away from the door in a smile of frazzled mess. Good. Don't leave me. If you walk too far away, I might vanish and go back to the future. The future? Shirley gazed at her dumbfounded. It's a long story, but that's not for you to hear. Scootaloo patted the teacher's wincing shoulder. That's for the princess. She'll understand. Or at least she'd better. She can't prevent the world from ending, but maybe she can help me figure out how it happened. She grunted at the sound of several sobs and flashed a frown over her shoulder. Stop crying. It'll all be fine. I've just got to talk to the princess. Maybe you should just sit down and I'll prepare a letter. Not a stupid letter, girl. I need to talk to Princess Celestia personally, Scootaloo exclaimed. She suddenly started at the sight of Shirley's flank. Through a sunny window, she could see a unicorn colt galloping back with 2 blue uniformed adult ponies in tow. You fetched the police on me? Shirley shivered, staring forlornly at the distraught classroom and then back at the raving Pegasus. Please, just try to stay calm, ma'am. No, this is good. Scootaloo beamed, clasping Shirley's wide-eyed face in a pair of hooves. Go on and call the police. Fetch the royal guard while you're at it. I need Princess Celestia's attention. She's got to know one way or another. Oh, goddess, the sunlight feels so good. She briefly panted as she gazed out the window to happily watch the arrival of the police. It's like I'm on fire, but in a good way. I wonder if I'll see the sunset. It's been ages since I've seen a sunset. The world is so cold and dead and lifeless. I've forgotten just how... She spat over her shoulder again. Stop crying! I thought ponies were stronger than this. I got him, Shirley. Snails panted, suddenly from the back of her classroom. He bowed out of the way as 2 tall colts marched in, gazing sternly in Scootaloo's direction. Ma'am, is there a problem? Stallions! Ha ha! Shirley guffawed and clapped her hooves wide-eyed. Dang it to blazes, when were you when I hit puberty? She cleared her throat, straightening her lips, and strongly orated. I have to see Princess Celestia right away. One uniformed colt raised his eyebrows. Is that a fact? Absolutely. I don't care what you need to arrest me or whatever. Just take me to her. This can't wait. And what exactly is it that can't wait, ma'am? The 2 colts marched towards her. She eyed them warily, her wings flexing. How many times am I going to have to spell it out to you? She furrowed her brow. 4 months from now, the world is going to end in fire. Every living pony is going to turn to ash while the sun and the moon die. I need to talk to the princess and figure out how this is going to happen so I can undo the damage that will be done. The officers glanced at the wilting side of the classroom, then back at the Pegasus. How about you just come with us? Yes, fine, take me, as long as we get to talk to the princess. Thank you, officers, Shirley murmured, back trotting towards the classroom. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't... Scootaloo gasped at her. Don't you stay here, she shouted and leaped towards her. We have to stay together, or else I'll be zapped forward in time. She jolted as two police ponies suddenly grabbed her by the flank. Let go! Easy now. The colts struggled and applied their weight. You've done quite enough. Didn't you hear me? Scootaloo wrangled her wings under one of the colts with veteran tenacity and easily flung the surprised officer across the room so he crashed into a filing cabinet, forcing the room full of fools to shriek. We have to stay together. I'm not even going to pretend to argue with you. Ma'am, if you don't calm down, we'll be forced to. The world is going to die in flames and you're telling me to calm down? Scootaloo snarled and lowered on her haunches. Her copper wings pointed threateningly at the two officers as they stumbled back onto their hooves and circled her. I'm not going to ask you this again, you good-for-nothing punks. Take me to the princess, or I will... It's all right. Shirley suddenly ran in the officer's way, blocking the space between them and the menacing Pegasus. Please, it's okay. There's no need for a struggle. She gulped. I'll go with her to see the princess. She turned from the blinking stallions and smiled gently at Scootaloo. Her coat was a ruby glaze of cold sweat. We're not going to get separated, okay? Just stick with me. We'll go see the princess together. Scootaloo breathed easier. She stood up straight and rode the cresting descent of adrenaline in her bloodstream. Whew, that's more like it. Looks like at least one pony in Equestria gives a crap about the future. She trotted towards the schoolhouse entrance, pausing to look back to make sure Shirley was walking with her as well. She smiled as the teacher strolled up. I'm sorry to be such a bother, but you gotta understand how important this is. Oh, absolutely, Shirley grinned back. You've obviously been through an awful lot, and it's so very noble of you to give us this warning. I'm sure Princess Celestia will be in your debt, not to mention all of Ponyville. I'm not doing this for the glory or fame. I just want to find a way to make my world sunny again. You like sunsets, don't you? Indubitably. Shirley nodded, briefly glancing back and squinting at the two colts. The officers followed as the four of them marched away from the schoolyard and towards the fringes of Ponyville. If you would follow me, ma'am, I know a place where we can send a telegram to Princess Celestia. I thought I frickin' told you. I need to speak with her face to face. Oh, but of course. But the telegrams are sent by Pegasi like you. This will be the fastest way we can get her to come see us. Oh, well, that's just fine. Yes, that's just... God, this grass is so amazing. Isn't the grass amazing? There's no grass in the future, you know.